The morning Ryan made me my last cup of coffee, I didn't know it was the last. That's what catches me now. How perfectly ordinary everything looked. Our house on Windermere Avenue was quiet, the way Thursday mornings always were. The Nespresso machine gurgling on the kitchen counter. Weak October light. Coming through the frosted pane above the sink. Ryan in his gray Henley standing at the island, reading something on his phone, while the eggs set in the pan. He looked up when I came downstairs, set the phone face down, which I didn't think anything of then, and slid a mug toward me. "Big day?" he asked. I told him I had the Rosedale presentation at 2, and the Annex project walkthrough at 4. He nodded like he was listening. He always nodded like he was listening. I was 36 years old, and I had built a mid-sized interior architecture firm called Renard & Associates from a rented studio in Kensington Market to a 12-person team on King Street West. We had won 2 Ontario Design Awards in 3 years. I had done that. Every client, every contract, every overdue invoice, I'd chased through a freezing January. That was mine. When Ryan and I got married 5 years earlier, he was freelancing as a project coordinator, picking up gigs wherever he could find them. I offered him a position as senior project manager at the firm because I believed in him. Or maybe, if I'm honest with myself now, because I wanted to believe in him. Those two things looked identical at the time. We kissed at the door. He told me to drive safe. I pulled out of the driveway in my white Range Rover and merged onto Bloor, thinking I was the luckiest woman in the city. Thinking we were a team. Jade joined the firm that September. She was 23, recently graduated from a college program in Sudbury, and she'd applied for our accounts coordinator posting on Indeed. Ryan had been on the hiring panel. He'd told me afterward that she was the strongest candidate by a wide margin. Sharp, reliable, already familiar with the project management software we used. I trusted his judgment. I hadn't sat in on that round of interviews. I had a site visit in Etobicoke. The first time I really noticed Jade was about 2 weeks after her start date. I came into the kitchen on a Tuesday around noon, and she was sitting alone at the small table by the window, eating instant noodles out of a thermos, scrolling through her phone with the blank expression of someone who had gotten very good at being alone in rooms full of other people. She startled when she saw me, then apologized. Genuinely apologized, like she'd been caught doing something wrong, and I told her there was nothing to apologize for, that the kitchen was for everyone. She smiled the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. I remember thinking, that girl is tired. Over the following weeks, Ryan began staying later at the office. Once, twice, 3 times a week. He'd send a text around 5, running long, grab something without me, and I'd eat dinner alone in front of the news and not think much of it, because I had done the exact same thing to him 100 times. That's the thing about marrying someone in a demanding field. You extend a lot of forgiveness in advance. The phone was the first real sign. It moved from the counter to his pocket, from the coffee table to face down beside the bed. He took it into the bathroom when he showered, which he had never done before. I told myself he was probably listening to a podcast. I actually believed that. I filled in the blanks with the most charitable explanation every single time. Because that is what you do when you trust someone completely. Then came the smell. He came home after 11 on a Wednesday in late October, and I was still up reading. He came in through the back door, and I went to hug him and caught something underneath the cold night air. Something sweet and synthetic. A body spray or a lotion. The kind you'd find at the Shoppers Drug Mart checkout. Not my perfume. I have one perfume, a bottle of Maison Margiela I've been using for years, and this wasn't it. I asked him, carefully, whose scent that was. He barely broke his stride. Oh, I forgot, we had the whole team out at the pilot tonight, end of the Rosedale project. You know how Daniela from accounting hugs everyone? I think she'd had a couple of drinks. He laughed, easy, light. I said nothing. My stomach did not agree with my silence. There were good days in between. Days when he brought home sushi from Kibo without being asked, or sent flowers to my office, or rubbed my shoulders when I came to bed tense. Those days were almost worse because they worked. They reset me. I'd feel guilty for the dark thoughts and fold them away, and try to be more present, more grateful, more generous with my trust. The credit card statement ended that. I review our joint RBC Avion card every month. Habit from running a business, I can't look at numbers without wanting to account for them. November's statement came through, and I was halfway down the itemized list when I stopped. A charge at an Esso in Huntsville for $62. A room charge, 2 nights, at a small lodge called the Birchwood Inn on Lake of Bays in Muskoka, totaling $430. I sat with the laptop open for a long time. Ryan had told me he was at a trade show in Vancouver that weekend. I had texted him on the Saturday morning, and he'd replied with a photo of a hotel room, the bed neatly made, a window showing gray sky. I had believed him. Huntsville is 4 hours north of Toronto. Muskoka is cottage country. And we owned a cottage there. A 3-bedroom A-frame on Peninsula Lake that I had bought 2 years before we married and renovated entirely with my own savings. Ryan had helped me choose the outdoor furniture. I closed the laptop. I did not confront him. I went to the bathroom, ran the cold tap, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. Then I went to bed and lay beside my husband in the dark and breathed very slowly and thought about what kind of woman I wanted to be when this was over. I gave myself 1 week. The following Thursday, while Ryan was at a client lunch, I now understood was not a client lunch. I drove up to the cottage alone. 4 hours on the 400 and then north on 11, through Barrie, through Aurelia, the landscape thinning out into birch and rock and sky. I had told my assistant I was working remotely. I hadn't told anyone else. The driveway was clear of snow, but there were tire tracks, fresh ones. I unlocked the front door with my key. The smell hit me first. My cottage, the one I had stripped to the studs and rebuilt, where I had chosen every tile and fixture and light switch myself, smelled like someone else's home. Vanilla plugins from the dollar store. Microwaved popcorn. Closed windows. I stood in the entrance for a full minute before I could make myself move. The kitchen told its story simply: take-out containers in the recycling, a near-empty bottle of Yellowtail Pinot Grigio on the counter, 2 mismatched wine glasses in the drying rack. My wine glasses were hand-blown from a studio in Prince Edward County. These were from IKEA. I climbed the stairs to the loft bedroom. The bed, my bed, with the Pendleton wool blanket I'd bought on a solo trip to Banff, was covered in a cheap polyester duvet, pale pink, the kind sold in sets at Walmart. On my nightstand, a tube of drugstore mascara, a phone charger, a chapter's receipt for a celebrity memoir. In my closet, pushed to one side, hung 3 dresses I did not own. I took photos, methodically, calmly, the way I would document a renovation site before demolition. Every room, every surface, every piece of evidence that another person had been living inside my life without my knowledge. I locked the cottage and drove back to Toronto in the dark. 4 hours of highway with the radio off. I did not cry once. I was too far past crying for that. That night, while Ryan slept, I transferred everything. The credit card statements, the photographs, a log I had started keeping of his late nights, to a private folder in my iCloud. Then I ordered a GPS vehicle tracker from Amazon, express delivery. 2 days later, with Ryan at the office, I spent 20 minutes in the driveway. The magnetic tracker fit neatly inside the rear wheel well of the Range Rover, the car I had bought 2 years ago, that Ryan drove more often than I did because I mostly took transit downtown. I synced it to an app on my phone. Then I went inside and made a pot of tea and got on with my day. For the next 10 days, I watched. The red dot on my phone told me a story Ryan had been telling himself for months. Lunch stops at a restaurant on Ossington that neither of us had ever mentioned. A Tuesday evening in Scarborough, parked for 2 hours outside an apartment complex. Returning home at 9:30. With a story about drinks with a client from Mississauga. Every lie was now documented in coordinates and timestamps on my screen. But the hardest part was the audio. I had placed a small listening device beneath the driver's seat. I told myself I was looking for confirmation, not cruelty. I got both. The first conversation I intercepted was a Tuesday afternoon. Ryan's voice. Low, warm, the exact voice he had used with me on our first dates. Jade talking about being bored, stuck inside, wanting to do something fun before the snow really set in. Ryan telling her to be patient, calling me the boss lady. Not with affection. With the particular contempt you can only generate towards someone you owe everything to and cannot bring yourself to admit it. I sat at my desk with my earbuds in and my hands flat on the surface and felt something shift inside me the way ice shifts in a thaw. Slowly. Then all at once, and then it is simply a different thing. 3 days later, he told her he had a work trip to Ottawa that he was going to cancel. Said they should take the long weekend and head up north. I'll use my card, he said. He meant my card, my RBC card that I had added him to as an authorized user 6 years ago, because I trusted him with my finances the same way I trusted him with everything else. Our SUV, he called it. Our SUV. I stayed very still. Then I called my father. My dad, Harold, is 71 years old and retired from 30 years on the Ontario bench. He has never in his life raised his voice unnecessarily. He is the most composed person I have ever known, which is probably where I get it from. He answered on the second ring, and I said his name, and he heard something in it immediately. "What's happened, Lena?" Not a question, a recognition. I told him everything. The receipts, the cottage, the tracker, the audio. I emailed him the photo folder while we were on the phone. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How do you want this to end?" I did not want a quiet conversation in a mediator's office where Ryan got to manage his image and walk away feeling like he'd handled something professionally. I wanted it to be undeniable. I wanted him to stand in it. My father was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you need." I told him to wait for my signal. The signal came the following Friday. I had been watching the tracker all morning. By 11, my Range Rover was northbound on the 400. I already knew. But then my phone buzzed with a text from Amy, my closest friend since university, my maid of honor, the person I had asked 2 days earlier to quietly follow Jade's public Instagram account and alert me the moment anything went up. Amy's message was 3 words: "Lena, watch this now." The video was 12 seconds long. Jade had filmed herself from the passenger seat of my Range Rover. I could see my parking pass on the visor, my Roots keychain hanging from the hook, and tilted the phone toward Ryan in the driver's seat, who was grinning like someone who had gotten away with something beautiful. The 400 stretched ahead of them, lake country opening up on either side, a crisp blue October sky above. She had put text on the screen in large white font. "Cottage weekend with my man. His wife's out here funding the whole thing and still has no idea. Lol. Unbothered." His wife. I watched it twice. Then I saved it to my camera roll, forwarded it to my iCloud, texted the link to my father with the words "it's time," and closed the app. I did not scream. I did not throw my phone. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water from the Brita, drank it standing at the counter, and then I picked up the spare keys to my gunmetal Volvo XC60 and walked out of the house. I called my father from the driveway. "They're on the 400, heading north," I said. "Past Barrie in 40 minutes. Gordon and I will be at the Innisfil rest stop," he said. Gordon was his driver, a former OPP officer, a man of absolute discretion who had worked for my father for 12 years. "We'll be waiting." "Dad," I paused, "thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he said quietly. "Drive safe." I merged onto the 400 northbound and set the cruise control and watched 2 red dots on my dash-mounted phone, theirs and mine, moving up the same ribbon of highway through the October landscape. The trees had mostly gone bare, but there were still patches of rust and amber on the hillsides, the particular beauty of an Ontario autumn that I had always loved. I noticed it consciously that afternoon. I remember thinking, I'm going to keep all of this. The trees, the lake, the cottage, the firm, all of it stays with me. At the Innisfil rest stop, my father was standing outside a black Chevrolet Suburban in his wool overcoat, hands in his pockets. He looked at me and opened his arms, and I walked into them and held on for a moment. He didn't say anything. He just held on. Then he stepped back and looked at me steadily. "Ready?" I said yes. There is a stretch of the 400 near Barrie where construction barriers narrow the road from 3 lanes down to 2. Traffic slows and compresses. You have nowhere to go but forward. Gordon drove the Suburban alongside my white Range Rover, timed it, cut smoothly in front, and braked hard. The Range Rover lurched to a stop. My Volvo pulled up behind and sealed the exit. I had 1 second to compose myself. Then I got out of the car. The October air was cold and sharp. Traffic had stopped on both sides. Drivers were already rolling down windows, already reaching for their phones. Ryan saw me coming before I reached the Range Rover. I watched his face change, the easy holiday expression dissolving instantly into something white and frozen. He actually hit the door locks, which was so deeply pathetic that I almost felt embarrassed for him. I walked to the passenger side. Jade was pressed back in my seat, both hands up, eyes wide. I looked at her through the glass for a moment. She looked younger than she had seemed in the office. She also looked terrified. My father materialized at the driver's window. He didn't shout or bang on the glass. He simply stood there, and the weight of his stillness was enough to keep Ryan pinned in his seat. I tried the passenger door handle. Locked. I looked back at Gordon, who came around with a slim gym tool and opened it in one practiced motion. I pulled the door open. "Jade," I said, "please get out of my vehicle." She shook her head rapidly, tears already falling. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean." "I'm not here to hurt you," I said, and I meant it, "but you need to get out of my car." She didn't move. I reached across and unclipped my parking pass from the visor, deliberately, pointedly, then held out my hand. "My sunglasses," I said. She was wearing them. My Oakley prisms from MEC, she pulled them off with a shaking hand and placed them in mine. I stepped back. Ryan shoved his door open and stood on the highway asphalt with his hands out, his voice already taking on the careful managing quality I had watched him use with difficult clients. Lena, listen. Let's not do this here." "I don't want to talk," I said. "Lena, I want to say something, and I want these people to hear it." I turned to face the drivers who had gotten out of their cars, phones recording. I spoke clearly and without drama. "This is my Range Rover. I bought it 3 years ago. The man behind me is my husband, who has been using my credit card, my cottage, and my vehicle to conduct an affair with a woman he hired. They just came from a weekend at the cottage I own on Peninsula Lake, which they have been using for months without my knowledge. This morning, she posted a video from my passenger seat calling me clueless. I let that land. I want everyone watching to see who's clueless now." The murmur from the crowd was low and continuous. I walked to Ryan, reached into my coat pocket, and produced the spare key fob for the Range Rover. I held it where his eyes went immediately, and where 4 camera phones could see it. Then I looked at my husband, this man I had fed and housed and employed and loved, and I said, very quietly, "Everything you have, Ryan, came from me. The job, the car, the cottage, the weekend, all of it. As of right now, all of it is gone." I set the key fob on the roof of the car, not in his hand, on the roof. The nearest Tim Hortons is back at the Barry exit. I'd start walking. I got into my Range Rover, adjusted the seat back to where I kept it, and drove north. That evening, from the cottage, I called RBC and canceled every card Ryan held as an authorized user. Then I called our property management company and had the access codes changed on both the Toronto house and the cottage. I texted my assistant a list of items to be packed from the bedroom closet on Windermere. Ryan's dress shirts, his hockey gear, his collection of Canadian whiskey from the sideboard, and left on the front porch by morning. The divorce filing came the following week. I had retained a family law firm on Bay Street, whose name Ryan would recognize immediately. The prenuptial agreement he had signed before our wedding, which he'd barely glanced at, calling it a formality, held firm. Every asset I had brought into the marriage and every asset I had built through the firm during it remained solely mine. The cottage, the King Street office, the RBC portfolio, the Range Rover. Ryan contested nothing. He had nothing with which to contest. There was one final thing I hadn't told anyone. On our 2nd anniversary, I had given Ryan a watch, a Tag Heuer Carrera he wore constantly and mentioned at dinner parties with a particular kind of casual pride. It was his anchor to the identity he'd built inside our marriage. The husband of someone accomplished, the man who wore good watches. What he didn't know, what I had arranged quietly with a watchmaker on Queen Street 2 days before giving it to him, because I'd had 2 years of small doubts by then and had been unable to fully silence them, was that the movement inside had been replaced. The case was genuine. The engravings were real, but the mechanical heart of it was a high-grade replica, worth perhaps $40 at most. When Ryan, in his new circumstances, brought it to a dealer on Yonge Street, hoping for a few $1,000s to cover first and last on a basement apartment, the dealer examined it for 4 minutes, set it back down, and apologized. I heard about this from Amy, who heard it from someone who knew Ryan's cousin. I was sitting at my drafting table on King Street when she called to tell me. I put the phone down and looked out the windows at the city for a minute. Then I picked it up and got back to the Rosedale job, which I was nearly finished with. 16 months passed. I don't often think about how Ryan is doing. When I do, it arrives neutrally, the way you might think about a contractor whose work you've since had fixed. A practical recollection, not an emotional one. Amy ran into him once at a Home Depot in Etobicoke and described a man who looked like someone doing an impression of himself from 5 years ago, smaller somehow, distracted, buying a single smoke detector. She said he didn't see her. Jade, from what I understand through the loosely connected network of mutual acquaintances that every city eventually produces, left Toronto about 6 months after the highway. She had apparently tried to leverage the notoriety of the video, which circulated widely on Canadian Reddit and several TikTok compilations for weeks, but found that the internet's appetite for public humiliation is shorter than it seems in the moment. The last anyone knew, she had moved back to Northern Ontario. The Instagram account she'd used for that ill-fated Friday post had been deleted long ago. Last October, exactly a year after that drive up the 400, I was back at the Peninsula Lake Cottage. I had spent 2 weeks that August with a painter and a carpenter from Parry Sound, stripping out every surface that needed stripping and redoing it in the way I had originally intended. Wide plank white oak floors, a cast iron wood stove, a new Pendleton blanket in a colorway I'd chosen this time for myself alone. I stood on the dock at 7 in the morning with a pour-over coffee, something I'd finally learned to make properly, and watched the light come across the water. The loons were out, 2 of them, maybe the same pair as always. They dove and surfaced without urgency, without apparent concern for anything beyond the next dive. I had started seeing someone. His name is Ben. He's an urban planner with the city, and he laughs at the same things I do and is not threatened by the fact that I run my own firm. We are not in a hurry. We are doing this slowly and carefully, which is, I have come to understand, the only way that's worth doing. I thought about Ryan that morning, briefly, holding my mug with both hands in the cold air. Not with anger, not with grief. The way you think about a chapter you've finished and understood and closed. I had believed, for a long time, that what he had taken from me was the most important thing I owned. The peace of that house on Windermere, the security of the marriage, the version of myself that had trusted completely. Standing on the dock with the sun coming up over the birch trees, I understood that he hadn't touched any of it. Not really. The things that were genuinely mine had never been his to take. My work, my judgment, my capacities to start over without asking anyone's permission. I finished my coffee and went inside. The cottage smelled like birchwood and clean, cold air coming through the window. I'd cracked an inch. It smelled like mine.